Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is the producing artistic director of the White Horse Theater Company, for which she recently directed the world premiere production of her play, You Are Perfect. She's a board member of the Players, co-founder of the Producers Circle, and a member of the Stage Directors and Choreographers Society, as well as the Dramatists Guild. Her new play, Broken Story, is currently running its West Coast premiere at the Sherry Theater in the North Hollywood Arts District. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cyndy A. Marion.
Thank you.
Welcome to North Hollywood.
Oh, I'm excited to be here.
So many questions I want to ask. So we'll start with this one, the main one. You basically your background's mainly directing.
Correct.
In New York. So what got you into playwriting, and how'd you fall into that path, and how'd you find success with, forgive this because it might come in as a backhanded compliment, how'd you find success with so few?
Good question. Well, it's funny, the playwriting and I actually go way back, believe it or not. Back to when I was in college. I think it was my sophomore year, I took a playwriting class just because I've always loved theater and was interested in theater. I did some acting as a kid. And, we wrote a few one-act plays, and I remember the way that I went about writing them was through improvisation. Like, we would be in a hotel room, and a friend of mine, we would just start improvising, and then that's where the script came from. And dialogue just felt really natural to me. And my professor kind of pulled me aside and said, I really think you should consider doing an independent study in playwriting. And I said, I don't really think I have enough to write about right now, so I'm going to just pursue, history, which was my major, and I took a little directing, and I kind of fell in love with that. And then years later, when I finally felt like I had something to say as a writer, or I wanted to put something on paper, I think my history led me to some, I guess you could say, captivating murder stories. And I just sort of came up with this sort of idea, based on my own sort of obsession with the material and having done a lot of research, that what would it be like if a young version of an old version of Susan Atkins could have a conversation with her younger self. And that's where You Are Perfect came from. And it is a very well-known subject, the Manson murders, Susan Atkins, Charlie. So I think as a playwright, having written a play about that topic got me a lot more attention than I would have if I'd written a piece about my neighbor, So I think the subject really sort of, gave me a little more, how can I say, ability to put it out there quickly. And then after the first play, I didn't think I was ever going to write another one again, but another murder story, in Benedict Canyon captivated me, and I ended up writing Broken Story, which is the piece that I'm out here for right now.
Oh, we'll definitely delve into those in a little bit. So based on what you said, how much background in improv did you have? And did you do long form? Did you do short form? Or did you have any background? Just like, we're going to ad lib and just see where it goes.
Yeah, I don't think I did take more formal improv training in grad school, but I don't think when I was in college that I had really done very much. I mean, I was a drama counselor at summer camp in North Carolina for several summers, and I remember when I was a camper, we did a lot of improv, but it wasn't like anything based on any, like Spolin or any well-known improv style or school of improv. It was just, the kind of thing where they didn't really know what to do with us. So they're like, just get up and start talking, So that's, I don't think I really had that much formal improv training, but it felt natural somehow to just sort of play out these scenarios,
So did you follow the advice and take formal playwriting, or just like it was just there naturally based on that improv background?
I have never studied playwriting other than that one course in college. And then, I took when I was getting my MFA in directing, we did a lot of dramaturgical study. Lynn Thompson was running the dramaturgy program at that time. She was the dramaturg involved in the big Rent scandal. So she was really good, and we did. I don't know if you would call it devised theater, but we would basically write pieces based on research and just ideas that we had. So we were definitely writing things. I don't know if I would call them plays, but there was writing and a lot of research going on, which I think also informed, my thinking, because I'm a history major and I love research and I love imagining how things could have gone one way or another way. And so I think that's sort of where theater and history kind of came together for me.
So I'm going to totally change the subject. We'll get back to this, because you just brought something up that I'm not aware of, and I'm not quite even sure that our listeners will be, or watchers. The rent scandals. I'm not aware of this, so
No?
can we delve? No, can we delve into this, and then we'll get back to the other aspects.
Okay, yeah,
there might be a lesson here for playwrights. So don't do this.
Absolutely. I mean, this was I'm not a specialist in this, but I do believe this was one of the first big lawsuits where a dramaturg basically claimed, rights to a piece. So it was the Jonathan Larsh, Lynn Thompson claimed that she, as a dramaturg on the project, had, substantial influence in the actual outcome of what was on the page. And I think she wanted to, get some credit for that. And obviously, because it was a huge financial success, she wanted to get her share. And I believe she won the case. And so now there's arguments about, what is dramaturgy? Is it, how much of it is just giving ideas, or are you actually contributing to the actual writing in some way? I don't have the answer for that, but I know it's a very hot topic.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I think Gary Garrison was just talking about this, because we're talking about dramaturgy, and we just talked about the fact that no, I think he was more in the reversal, where he was a little bit more protective of where the playwright was a little more concerned that the dramaturg would take the work. But now we have the reversal. So I don't know what the answer to that is, and how do you, what's...
Well, I think up until that case, writers probably would not have been afraid that a dramaturg would, have that power or have that ability to make that claim. But after, and I don't think that Jonathan Larson ever thought that. I mean, he was dead after the course came to case, but anyway, I don't think that before that case any writers were really worried about that. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think that really sort of raised a red flag. And now as writers, when we know we have collaborators like dramaturgs or people that are significantly contributing to our scripts, we may want to get contracts with them, or get that all spelled out right from the get-go as to who owns what and who's considered a writer and who isn't, because especially now today with devised theater and many different people contributing ideas and aspects that eventually become full scripts.
All right, good to know. All right, well, play cautious and get something like in writing or something like that, so you guys can...
Always. That's my motto, no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm producing... Anytime I'm working with anybody in a collaborative fashion, I want to make sure to get that contract spelled out, just in case.
Sure.
So nobody cares unless you make money, right? But
ain't that the truth? That's why I'm curious how much of that was, I'm going to do something real quick. I'm going to bring this away from you just a little bit. The only reason why is because I'm distracted by it, and I don't want anybody else to be either. No, you're good. You're good. I just want to make sure I see your face, because I want to make sure that people, I love this interview. But anyway, so all right, back to you. Having no formal training except for the one class, how did you learn about structure and the elements of playwriting?
Sure. Well, I think the dramaturgy course, a lot of that was looking at scripts, looking at structures of scripts. Obviously, as a director, when you're training as a director, I mean, you read scripts, you learn how to break scripts down, you learn, about the inciting, the seeds of conflict and the inciting incident, and the complicating incidents that all lead up to the crisis that then leads up to the climax and then leads up to the denouement or no denouement. So as a director, you're trained how to break down a script and how to find the moments of tension and the turning points and this, that, and the other. So I feel like directing is excellent training for playwriting. And when some of the plays that as a director I always struggled with the most were the ones that had too many words. As a director, I think of Tennessee Williams. I'm a huge fan of Tennessee Williams, but I'm a big fan of his later work, particularly because it's not so long-winded and it's more rhythmic. And as a director, I have a musical sensibility and I'm always looking at rhythm. And there would be sections in some of his other earlier plays, for example, Small Craft Warnings, where there would just be so many words that as a director, it's like, how do I sustain this moment so that it's active and interesting? You know, it's just so much talking. So I think as a writer, I mean, that's sort of what I aim when I'm writing plays, is to write plays that will play, that really have to play. They won't be really plays if you can just read them, you know.
You mentioned his later work. Are there any particular pieces that that really stand out in that regard for the later stuff that you know, that maybe it's off the beaten path of things that are, you know, it's not Streetcar, it's not Summer and Smoke, it's not Glass Menagerie?
Yeah, I would say like some of the ones I've directed that I feel that way about are Cavalier from Milady, which also incorporates elements of ballet, and it's highly, you know, stylized and rhythmic, and there's just the right amount of text. In the Bar of a Tokyo Hotel, which actually even experiments with fragmented text where sentences are incomplete, which is really, in my mind, more the way human beings really communicate with each other. Everything isn't always a perfect, fluid sentence, you know? Clothes for a Summer Hotel has aspects of that. That's one of his later pieces also that I think is fascinating. I mean, just in general, if you look at the later work, it's just way more theatrical and less literary. And Sam Shepard, too, is another one I'll point to because I'm really influenced by him as a writer. You know, some of his early plays were actually based on music, like jazz music. I don't love those because I feel like they're missing an emotional component and a character development. They're more like happenings, kind of, you know. But if you look at plays like Fool for Love, Eyes for Consuela, I mean, they're the way that he's able to use language in a rhythmic sense and in a theatrical sense, so that it's not just merely talking to the point where, as a director, you're like, how do I stage this? I mean, this is better if you just read it. You know?
You mentioned Seeds of Conflict. What exactly? Unpack that. Tell me exactly what that means.
Seeds of Conflict. Sure. Yeah, that's sort of when, as a director, when you're breaking down a script, you're looking at the point in the play in the very beginning. The sort of like the given, the thing that sets the conflict in motion. It's before the actual conflict happens, but without the seeds of conflict, there won't be a conflict. So it's like the beginning, like the potential for a conflict to exist, kind of.
Is there an example you can give?
Oh, yeah, let's see.
Well, I apologize because every episode...
Yeah, I know. I watched one of yours today, and I'm like, oh, they're on the spot. Better be ready for that.
It never fails. There's always the on-the-spot question, you can't really prepare anybody for it, but certain questions or statements come up where it's just like, I'd love an example, you know.
Okay, well, like, for example, I'll give you my piece, You Are Perfect, just because I'm very close to it. The seeds of conflict are probably Susan Atkins' mother's death at a very young age. Without that backstory, that incident that happened to her as a child, I don't know if she would have been in the place where she would have been so vulnerable and malleable that she would have, you know, allowed herself to get involved with somebody like Charlie Manson. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a very vague example, but it's just something that was a really important element in her backstory.
Do you think those are necessary, or do you think that they are definitely things that can help? Can you get by without having those in a piece?
Yeah, I mean, you can get by without having them, but I think that if you can find one, or you can locate something like that, I think it's only going to make the tension and the conflict stronger, more dramatic. Yeah.
You mentioned directing really helping you out. Mm-hmm. Are there, and I don't know what your background is, so maybe this isn't necessarily a fair question, maybe not the right word, but are there other elements that you think would help playwrights, or do you just think playwriting's enough?
You know, having read so many plays as a director, and, finding so few that I actually really wanted to work on, I would say I definitely think playwrights can benefit from acting, from directing, anything to actually see what it's like to physicalize the words and get inside of what that feels like. Because, I've read so many plays that really read to me more like, I don't want to say novels, but they're better when you sit down and just read them. That when you actually put them on stage, it's like I said earlier, you're trying to stage a moment where it's really just a lot of talking, but not a lot of action. And I think the best plays are filled with action.
How do you achieve that? Is that just through stage directions, or can you achieve action in dialogue as well? Are we talking about dramatic action? Are we talking about physical action? Where are we at with this? In your aspect, when you're bringing that topic into you from your point of view?
Yeah, I think we're talking about all of it. I would definitely say I wouldn't rely on the stage directions. As a director, we're taught to cross all the stage directions out and ignore them. So, and so that means that as a playwright, if you really want to convey your message, you need to do it in the text. You can't rely on the stage directions. I guess what I mean by action is something that's not static, meaning that it allows for movement. And I don't just mean movement of lips, but I mean like movement of the body. Like there's a need to move in space in order to convey the message of a conflict or a moment. Also, it involves, interaction with the actual environment that you're in, meaning that where it's presented is just as important as what is presented. It's not just, it can't just be some conversation that could happen anywhere. It has to happen in the space of this world that the playwright is creating. And another thing that I think playwrights could benefit from with learning directing is it's not just about the words. It's about evoking something from the words that creates metaphor and creates symbolism, so that when somebody looks at your words, they're seeing something. They're getting an image for something. They may also be hearing something. Like it should be. I guess the more poetic, the more emblematic the writing is, the more theatrical I think it is.
Do you intentionally place metaphors and symbolism in your pieces, or is it just one of those things that are just so intuitive and subconscious that you don't even realize they're there? And
it has to be. If I think too much about it, it isn't going to work, at least in my opinion. I have a play right now I'm working on. It's my first biographical play, and it's called Thistles. And I can't tell you yet what that metaphor is, but I know there's something there. It's about a very cold family, and maybe there's something in that. But I feel like, and with Broken Story, I'd already written the play when I gave it the title, so maybe there was a little more forethought there, but I think the metaphor was already there, that this is not just about a news story that's being broken. It's about broken people, broken situations, broken lives. But when I sit down to write the piece, I don't sit down thinking about the metaphor. But I have to tap into something in my subconscious. And you can't really call me a prolific writer, because I've only, in 6 years, I've only written 3 plays. So I only sit down to write when I feel like I'm connected to something deeply inside me. I won't sit down to write unless I am.
Understandable.
Which is probably not like the common thing for most writers, I would think.
No, but do you have actors, if you're working directly with them, do they come up and say, "Oh, what does this mean? Where were you going with this? What were your intentions?" Do you have those moments, and do you have answers, or just like, "Look, I was just writing, and this is what came out. What does it mean to you?" Or just like, you run with it, you tell me what it means?
It's a good question. Absolutely. The funny thing is it's intuitive what I'm writing, but yet I know after I've written it, I know what I'm trying to achieve, and I would be able to answer most of those questions, I think, from actors. But I use actors in the writing process too. After every draft I write, I always read it aloud with an actor. I play the parts. I have to, because I have to feel what it's like to be inside each one of those characters. That helps me realize when there's something that's not connecting. So it's a very hands-on process, and maybe that comes from my directing experience. I don't know, but I have to immediately hear it out loud, and I have to read it out loud with somebody.
Just one other person?
Usually just one other person, yeah. We play multiple parts, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then do you switch off? Because you okay.
Mm-hmm. Switch off.
So at some point within that reading, you will have read all the parts.
Exactly, yeah. And that's how when I'm reading it, that's when I often realize this needs to be fixed, this needs to be looked at. It sort of helps me get inside it. So I find that incredibly beneficial. I don't know if other writers do that or not, but it's so helpful to my writing process.
And do you, at some point, do you sit back and listen to it with a full?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, usually I'll do it the informal way, and then I'll do a reading with a full cast of actors, and I'll listen and I'll go back and rewrite. I do several readings. I mean, I learned so much from listening, and I like to hear different actors read the parts too, because you learn something different from each take that somebody gives you. So, and I know that's not easy. It's not easy to come by. It's not always easy to have as for writers to have access to actors. I mean, I'm fortunate because I have a theater company, so I kind of have a lot of actors on hand, but not every writer, has that. So I would encourage writers to, if they can, to get involved with, like, not just writing groups, but groups of theater companies, acting companies. Try to somehow tap into actors, know actors, so that you can put these things together.
Do you recommend doing that with just a group of actors or with other writers as well?
It's interesting. I've never worked with other writers. I take that back. I'm really having my first collaboration right now, actually, with Broken Story, because the co-producer on the show is a playwright. She's Pasadena based, and I met her when she was doing a show in New York, and she did give me some really excellent feedback on this. So I think obviously writers would be great, but I think actors give a different perspective, right? Because they're actually in the roles, and they're coming at it from a different place than a writer would be, I think.
So you, from what I gather, both of your two main plays right now were based on actual events.
Yes.
How much creative license have you taken, or how true to the story did you remain? And you can go through both of these, because just in case people aren't familiar, and it might stir up some more interest and hopefully garner some.
Yeah, with You Are Perfect, I would say the story was very closely aligned to real events. I mean, it's not meant to be a history piece or a documentary of anything like that, but I'm using the real characters' names. I'm very closely following the research. I think where it maybe takes its turn is in what I'm, as a playwright, trying to do, which is ask questions of what really happened, and what is the real truth, and what if this woman, what if she's really a human being who made a mistake, and can we look at her as a human being rather as some sensationalized media portrayal of some crazy sexy girl who was on a lot of drugs. And I think I'm also interpreting the research as a historian would, to the extent that I may be even making a slight case in the play for the fact that maybe she never murdered anybody. Maybe what she did was talk a lot, and destroyed her own credibility. But in any event, I'm taking a real story, and I'm asking people to maybe look at it through a slightly different lens. Want me to move on to the next one? Or?
No, actually, I just have a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you take a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood Quentin Tarantino approach to that and just totally change the ending?
Actually, that's it. I don't think I did quite that go. I didn't go quite that far with it to change the ending. But I do. I guess what I do is in the end. I mean, assuming that people kind of know what's going to happen. We know that we can't rewrite history, but I do sort of ask a question of the audience, like, can you possibly maybe look at this a little differently than you have been? But yeah, it's not quite that far-fetched.
Is this taking a sympathetic approach?
Yes, definitely. I mean, somebody who saw a version of it said to me, this is a love letter to Susan Atkins. And I think it is. I mean, as a writer, I tend to fall in love a bit with my subjects. I have an obsession with the subject, and I tend to be a little bit in love with the character, at least the main character in some way, at least in the first two pieces.
So in Broken Story, then, who did you fall in love with in that regard?
In Broken Story, I think I was in love with, or obsessed with sort of the same thing, with Susan Berman, who is the subject. She was very, very close, or best friends with Robert Durst, the serial killer. In Broken Story, the characters don't share the real names of the characters that inspired them, but I do follow history and the real story pretty closely. I add some fictional characters to it. One of them being the young journalist who's out to break the story, and that's sort of my lens. She's obsessed with the writer in sort of the same way that I became obsessed with Susan Berman. And I'm not a journalist, but that was sort of an entry point into the story. And then her editor is also a fictional character. And even though the play starts out as a story that seems to be a murder story about breaking a murder story and solving a murder, it turns into more of a personal interest story, and it becomes really more centered on the journalist and her identity, who she is. She learns a lot about herself, and in the end, it really becomes more about her than it is about the murder.
So I'm fascinated because the first story you seem to be, if we take your, did you say obsessed? Mm-hmm. Is that the word? I just want to make sure you use the right word. Yeah. Okay. Did you? So, you were obsessed more with the perpetrator in the first one, but you became obsessed with the victim in the second. Is that just... Well,
interesting you should call her the perpetrator in the first one, because I think my play takes a sort of different angle. It's sort of looking at her more as a victim of Charles Manson, and a victim of her upbringing and her circumstances. Okay. And it's sort of making the argument that maybe she didn't really do... I mean, she said a lot of horrible things, but I think you could look at it that she didn't actually kill anybody, that she said she did, but maybe she didn't. So I view Susan Atkins more as a victim. That's how I saw her.
Did you have to, particularly with Broken Story and in the Robert Durst aspect, especially because you're kind of basing it on the revelation of that story, did you have to ask for permission? Did you have to, licensing rights? I don't know.
It's a very good question. I was very worried about that with You Are Perfect, even though Susan Atkins is long dead. Her husband is still alive, and he's a lawyer, believe it or not, and lives in California, James Whitehouse. And so and he's actually mentioned in my script, and I was very worried about that. But I did get a lawyer. I did consult with a lawyer on that script, and basically, if you're not defaming somebody and they're in the public eye, then there really isn't much. I mean, somebody could have still tried to sue me, but the chances were pretty slim. Now with Broken Story, I didn't worry as much about that. Maybe because, I know changing names is not really enough, but I don't think that I'm saying anything about Durst that hasn't already been said. Do you know what I mean? I'm not, and if anything, I'm also sort of empathizing with him on some levels. I always take, I probably should have been a psychologist, but I always take a very sort of empathetic view of criminals or murderers. I always try to look at what we're all born in the same place, right? So what was it about this particular person's background or their situation in life that brought them to do what they did? So even though I'm not saying that Durst isn't a murderer, I'm sort of looking at it from a much more human perspective. I'm sort of looking at it that he was an ill person, If the family wants to come after me, go ahead, but they've got so many other people that have already, incriminated them. I don't really know how I'm adding to that, really.
Well, I guess that the reason why I asked, it wasn't even from that point of view. My point of view was really from the documentarian's point of view. It was like, wait, this is my story. You've just kind of turned it into a stage play, and that's where I'm. So did you?
Yeah. No, I didn't get any permissions from anybody to work on either of the pieces. So if they come after me, then go ahead. But I'm holding up freedom of speech, and in the end, Broken Story, it isn't the same story as the Durst story. I mean, it has a completely different ending. That's not at all That's all fiction. It's not real. So it takes the premises, the premise of it, but then it kind of turns it into a completely like, what if this is how it played out type of thing.
Because I'm only familiar with this one. You refer to him as a serial killer, but I'm not. I don't know of how many other victims did he have.
There were quite a few, and there's still some that are under question. For example, his first wife is missing. She was never found. Her body was never found. Kathy Durst. I mean, the implication is that he murdered her. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to point to that. He had a neighbor down in Galveston that he chopped up. He was on trial for that, Morris Black, and he did get off in a self-defense case, obviously because he had incredible lawyers. There also was some women up in Northern California in Eureka that were never found that they claim, that was probably attributed to him. I don't know that it was ever proven. So I guess that you could make the argument. He also killed a lot of his dogs, so you could make the argument he was a serial killer.
No, fair enough. Yeah. No, I did not know the history, so I was kind of curious. I figured I'd ask you.
I don't really think he is, because in my mind, a serial killer just kills because they have some sort of compulsion to kill. He always killed people he knew, and there was sort of more of sort of more of an emotional thing behind it, and I think he did it for attention. But I guess that serial killers do that too. I don't know, but it seems like a different breed. I don't know. I never really thought of him that way until other people pointed that out to me, and of course we're using that for the marketing because it's more juicy.
Sure, well, why not? Oh well, gosh, now I'm kind of torn. Let's go marketing first. Let's talk about marketing. So, how do you handle your own marketing, or?
We do. We have a consultant who works with us, Laura Seiner in Muse Studio Consulting. So she kind of helps us create a roadmap, key language, an angle to take, and then obviously that works with the PR. In New York, when we marketed Broken Story, we made no reference to the Durst at all, and I mean, I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing, but obviously, the Durst story does pull people in, I think. But the mistake in it that I found is that people felt like when they came in, they were kind of like, well, why didn't you tell us that this, the people who recognized it were irritated by that. Like, why are you trying to pass this off as an original piece? Kind of like what you just said. So I want to be honest about the fact that there is some connection to it. Obviously, the press rep loves it because, then you have something to push toward the media or whatever. But for me, it's actually more about being honest about the fact that that's where it starts, because I don't want people to be taken out when they recognize it if they do. And so far, that's, I think, really been working. We haven't had any reaction like that. And we've only been open for 3 performances. We had to close for COVID last week. But so far, I haven't felt that response.
In LA.
And it doesn't matter if you don't know that going in, like if you haven't read the marketing materials and you don't know who Durst is, it doesn't matter. The play stands on its own. But for those who do, I don't want them to be like, well, why didn't you tell us this? Why are you acting like you made this up? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. But that's what you're upset about? I don't know. Okay, so going back to marketing. How did it help? What did you do that brought people in those seats that you can share with playwrights that are trying to promote their work to, whether it's New York or LA or anywhere else for that matter? Yeah. What are there any secrets that you've discovered that help or that really like this is what helped us. Not to say that's going to help anybody, but just
I mean, like I said, I mean, the two pieces that I've had to market thus far have implications beyond me, right? So if people, I think people, when they see something that they recognize or that excites them, I mean, being able to, market something as a true crime story is definitely one angle that I think has brought people in that would not have come otherwise. Sure. I mean, obviously with Manson, you've got a whole, I mean, in LA, we only ran for 12 days, but we really got a lot of people just based on the fact that they were interested in this subject, Durst is a little less known, I have to say. And I mean, even though he was on trial here recently, you would think that would really be more on the top of people's minds, but it's hard to say. I do think that marketing has made a difference in getting people in. Definitely, I think it's made a difference in how people are receiving the piece. But anytime you have a play that has a real life element or an inspirational element that people are going to recognize, I think you want to capitalize on that. I mean, to market it. Sure.
So are you doing, is it press releases? Mm-hmm. Is it interviews? Is it, I don't know.
Yeah, all of it. I mean, we got more press in LA than we even began to get in New York, and I don't know if part of that is because it's a longer run. Part of it might be because we actually are promoting the Durst implication. I mean, I've done 2 podcasts prior to this one already. I've done 2 interviews prior to this. We did a trailer to promote it. So there's been quite a bit of interest, and I think we got the interest because of the subject matter. I don't know that we would have gotten it if it was just Cyndy Marion writing a play about a murdered writer. I don't know if that would have intrigued people as much.
So are they hunting you down? You're hunting them? You're putting requests in and just seeing who bites, or?
I know that the press agent, I mean, she sent out multiple releases. I know she's very diligent. So a good press rep is always a really good thing. So I got to give a shout out to her, Emily Owens. She's fantastic. And she does New York and LA. So I think having the contacts makes a difference. But you also have to have something that people are going to want to bite on, and I think that helps.
So did you seek her out, Emily Owens? Or
yes, I sought her out back when we were in New York, specifically because I knew that she was bi-coastal and she specialized in new writers. So, for example, if you have a show that you want to bring to both LA and New York, which is what I tend to like to do, having somebody that can work both angles, I think, is fantastic.
Do you recommend that? Do you recommend that publicist?
Yes.
And is it worth the money? Is it a lot of money, and is it worth it?
It is a lot of money, but I'll tell you, in LA, photographers are more expensive than the press agents.
Wow.
At least in my experience. Photographers, videographers, I mean, we're spending more on them than we are on the PR. And honestly, at the end of the day, the PR is what you have to take with you, right? I mean, Once the show is closed as a writer, in order to get your next production, what you need are reviews, you need articles, you need features, you need interviews, you need all of that stuff. And I'm really excited, I mean, we have at least 4 more reviewers coming, which is terrific. That'll be 5 reviewers. We would have had 6 if we hadn't had to cancel a weekend due to COVID, and I think that's pretty good. I mean, in New York, that would be fantastic because, there's so many plays opening in New York. To even get 1 or 2 reviewers in is like a big deal. So I don't know LA, the scene as well, but I would think that if you're getting, 5 or 6 reviewers in, 2 or 3 podcasts, 2 or 3 articles, that's a pretty good press, I think, pretty good promotion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting reviewers in the seats in LA is just, and maybe it was the fact that it played in New York as well. I
don't know.
I don't know. It's really hard to get reviewers, and usually here in some of the reviewers here, it's a, we'll call it a pay to play.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we do have one of those actually, and I'd never heard of that.
Yeah. Buy an ad and you'll get a review.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, no. Yeah. We'll give you a review if you. How does it? No,
if you
they
buy
don't.
The marketing package.
Exactly. But they flip it to where it's like, if you get a review, we'll put an ad in.
Okay. My question about that is, if you don't mind answering it, is does that taint how they review? If you're paying them, do they tend to just give you a good review, or are they honest?
Most of the time, it's you're paying for. So here's the rub. So with some of them, you're getting a synopsis of your play. It's not a review.
Okay.
It's a synopsis. It's a synopsis of your play with some of these.
Got it. Okay.
Now, when we did Play Noir 2016, it was a little bit of. We did a pay-to-play review, and we did have one reviewer come out, and it was a little. There were some overtly sexual aspects to this production with some of the pieces, but supposedly this reviewer couldn't find anything good to say about it.
Okay.
Now that being said,
yeah,
and I got the email. She forwarded me his response, and it was kind of a slap in the face. That being said, all the things that he pointed out when we got a review from a totally separate reviewer, it was the exact opposite of all the things that he was saying he had issues with.
Wow.
So again, I can't say, but that's my experience. But getting legitimate reviewers in LA is a little bit of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, interesting.
But you also look at it as a marketing aspect in that regard. I don't know what the answer is. If you gotta kind of take what you can. Right. And if it's like, all right, I'm going to spend $125 and maybe it'll get some butts and seats, then maybe it's worth it, and I'm buying the ad.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is in that regard.
Okay.
But that being said, you bring your original cast in?
No, we did that when we did You Are Perfect. We did the show in New York. Actually, it was a second New York production that we did specifically to take to LA. We brought the cast in from New York, and unfortunately, the cost of doing that limited the length of the run, because we had to house actors and we had to house stage manager and the whole thing. So we ended up only running, I think it was maybe 6 or 7 performances over a week and a half, which is not enough time to generate enough buzz or to get enough press. So this time we did the opposite. We brought in an LA-based director, and when we brought in all LA actors, and they rehearsed, out here in Los Angeles at the Sherry Theater, and that allows us now to run it for one whole month. I was not even supposed to be here. This is pre-pandemic that we set this all up. I was only supposed to be here for the tech week and the opening weekend, and then go back to New York, as I've got a job there. But now that we're working remotely, 100% remotely, I'm out here for the whole month, which is fantastic. So thank you, COVID, because I'm really enjoying living in LA. Nice weather, and it's great to be able, as a writer, to you want to see the whole run. You want to talk to people. You want to hear what people have to say. You want to do interviews like this one and be a part of the whole experience. So.
Sure. So you've gotten to see every performance in?
So far, I've seen all 3, and I plan to see. I may not watch every single one, but I want to be there, to greet people, and I want to be able to talk to people, hear what they think, and, what they have to say. In fact, on Friday night, we're having a panel after the show with the Southern California Dramatists Guild for writers. Yes. It's a panel on playwrights producing their own work bi-coastally. So it's myself and Susan Lambert-Haddam, who is also a playwright and producer out here with her company 134 West. So if there's writers out there interested, it should be a lively discussion.
Sure. Yeah. Matter of fact, our first guest for Playwright Spotlight just closed a show right before yours at the Sherry.
Oh,
yeah, April Littlejohn. So if there's if there's dried blood or anything on the stage,
we experienced that because they were in right before us. There were skulls on the walls. Yeah.
Yep, that's April.
Wow, a lot of blood everywhere.
Yeah,
no, they cleaned up really well. No, I have to say they did an impeccable job cleaning up. The place was perfect when we moved in.
Yeah, they're usually pretty good about cleaning up. So producing your own work. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that. Recommend it? Don't recommend it? Recommend it for starting off?
I think it depends. on your background as a writer. I come from a directing background, and often directors end up having to be the producer because in these small theaters, there's just the producers are often, I hate to say it, but they're not even really producers, or there aren't any producers, and you're having to sort of take that role on. So I like it because as an artist, I feel like I have more control, because I think producing, is part of the artistic product. I mean, obviously, if you make bad decisions as a producer and you don't pick the right venue, or you bring in the wrong people, or you don't pay attention to the details, it's going to show in the art, right? So writers as producers, I think if they're interested in being a part of getting their hands dirty and really being a part of being in the theater space, and they have an interest in that sort of thing, I think it definitely benefits your play in the long run, because you're from the very beginning, you're picking out the right venue, you're picking out the right team, the people who really are going to be able to bring this work to life. You're going to be involved in everything, the marketing, the day-to-day thing, and you're going to make sure it's done right. You're going to raise the money, and it's your baby. So I like doing it because I feel like there's nobody to blame but myself if at the end of the day it doesn't look good, or some corner was cut. I'm the one who cut it. So, and usually I try not to do that. I try to make sure that everything really comes together the best it can.
And what about directing your own work?
I have done that. I mean, the first two pieces, Your Perfect and Broken Story, I wrote basically because I wanted to direct them, and I had a desire to direct them, and I felt like they weren't finished until I direct them, because if I couldn't direct them, then if I could direct them and they worked, then that would make sense. But if I couldn't direct them, then the plays they needed more work. So I felt like I had to do that. With my third play, I don't want to direct it at all. And I think that's because it's so personal. It's a piece that's really very closely based on my mother's family, and the main character is very closely based on myself. So I feel like there needs to be some distance from it, and it's also a play of mine that I think is a little stylistically different. It's a little more, I don't want to say it's more like those talkie plays that we were talking about earlier, but it definitely is more... It's more traditional in style than the other two pieces. The other two pieces are really theatrical in their staging, and I feel like you have to have a real vision in order to make them work. You have to really come in with a strong directing vision. But with this third one, I don't want to direct it. It's the first time I've ever said that about my work, but that's sort of how I feel.
I have two questions. First one is, what makes theatrical staging, or staging theatrical?
Theatrical staging, what makes it theatrical? Again, I think you have to have, for me, it's a world of a play where there's one location, right? It's not like the scenery is coming on and off on rollers. It's not realistic setting. It's a setting, like for You Are Perfect, for example, the setting is the desert. Even though the action is really taking place in a jail cell, the setting is the desert. Now you can stage it with a little, when I staged it originally, it was a small cell around sand. But I want something that's not going to translate in anything other than the theater. Meaning if you put a video camera on it, it wouldn't be as interesting. It has to exist in real time, in real space. And it has to exist in a moment where we're all breathing the same air, and it's going to change every night depending on the mood somebody's in, or it's the whole world, the whole experience of the piece, and I think simultaneity of time also, so that one person might be doing one thing on stage, but the other person's in another world, but yet you're getting something from the picture as well as from what they're saying.
Does that include sound and light?
The whole scape. I mean, I wish I could explain it better, but it's just something. It's something visceral. I don't really. It's something it can't exist outside of the theater medium. It's just everything, all those senses happening at the same time. I mean, I don't go so far as Sam Shepard did as to put vibrators in the seats, but it's it's visceral.
So what did you take away from giving up Broken Story to somebody for the West Coast direction? Were there things that you didn't pick up from when you directed it? Were there new ideas? I'm like, oh man, I loved that.
Yeah, and that's the exciting thing. I mean, I directed it. I didn't want to direct it again, obviously, and also being that it was a lot, we were doing it in LA, I couldn't have anyway. But I got a fantastic director, Tamara Rupert, and we'd known each other we didn't actually, we were from the same college, Davidson College, but we didn't actually meet in college. We met after through an alumni network program, but we're both directors, so we never really had a chance to work on anything together. So yeah, when I went into the first dress rehearsal, or not even dress rehearsal, the last run through when I first got to LA, I remember looking at the play and there was a scene in the beginning that she just totally nailed that we struggled with in rehearsal. Like we tried everything and it just didn't work as well as it could have. But her directing, the way she directed it, it just, bam, it worked.
What do you think that was? Do you know what it was? Do you know what made that scene work this time?
It was a choice that she made. I mean, she said in rehearsal they also were having some issues with it, but then she gave the actor a particular direction. And it stuck. It just sort of like unlocked it. And the beauty is they've been able to recreate it. I mean, there've been moments in rehearsal where as a director we found something, but then the actor may not be able to reconnect with it, or it doesn't stay fresh from night to night. But whatever choice they made, I'm not asking. That's their secret. But it's reading, at least from my perspective. Mm-hmm.
How in depth or intricate are your stage directions?
In the beginning, when I first started writing with You Were Perfect, they were practically non-existent. And I mean...
Like a Shakespeare approach?
Well, not
they
quite.
Fight.
I mean, they were there, but I guess I sort of took for granted that everybody knew what I had in my head, and I as a director, I'm so used to not paying any attention to stage directions that I didn't want to but then I realized, as a writer, if you really want people if you really want it to be interpreted the way you're thinking of it, you need to either make sure it's in the language or put in some stage directions that lend it, give them an idea of what you think that moment should be about. So I definitely use more than I did, but I still am really, really of the mindset that, I really want the actors and the directors to bring that. I want it to be in the language, and then I want them to find it. So I give skeletal stage directions, but not a lot of details.
Is it a lot of parentheticals, or is it actually just like action as far as...
Yeah, action, like if there's a kiss happening or an almost kiss, or if somebody's getting, thrown to the ground, that will be in there. Description a little bit of the location, but not in great detail. Like, for example, a desert with a rock. I'm not going to say, an orange desert or, this, that. I'm not going to describe like the color necessarily of stuff. And then, I might have parentheticals where I'll say, an intention for a line. Like there's this one line I'm struggling with in my current play, and I don't have a parenthetical in there yet because I feel like it's implicit in the line, but maybe I should put something in. The line is, you can use my network. Okay, it's a line about someone who's offering to let the neighbor use their internet. But based on the nature of their relationship, I think it should be fairly seductive. But nobody's read it that way yet. The few readings we have, you can use my network, but I really think it should be, you can use my network. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So should I put that in there? Maybe I should. I probably will.
Would that be with italics then, or?
I think it would be like just in a parentheses, okay. Seductively or flirtatiously. Okay. Sure. I usually use teasingly, but that isn't always strong enough. People don't always get that.
Sure.
So
how complex are your sets? Or do you keep it fairly simple?
I think that they, the actual sets have been pretty complex, but the question is it in the script, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you're asking for a desert, that could be very simple, right? It could be just, when we did it in LA, we couldn't bring sand in because it was just too costly and difficult. So we just...
It's right next door. It's 20 miles
You're
west.
Right. Good point. We should have, but we would have had to hire a truck. Now that you say that, we should have. I mean, we brought sand in from Canada when we did it in New York, but in any event, we did. I think the reason why we couldn't bring sand in was because we didn't have exclusive use to the theater. That's a big thing in LA. Is you have to be able to strike your stuff. So we couldn't do that, but we did just pick like a bare floor that was kind of not black, but kind of, it was like a grayish hue that could have been like sand-like or whatever. And then we had projections on the back wall, but all that the script called for was a basically a bed in the middle of a desert. So that's complex. I think the way that I look at it is sort of expansive in the sense that it can be interpreted in many, many different ways, right? For Broken Story, I'm trying to remember. I think it's an abstract skeletal interior of a canyon home, and the way the designer for New York, and actually it is the same set from New York. It's a different cast and a different director, but we brought the set across country in a U-Haul, and it's pieces of fabric that are put on but look like broken pieces. So it looks almost like an installation of pieces with a door. But it could be anything. I mean, it's just an abstracted skeletal interior of a home, however you interpret that. So I don't know if that's complex or not. I think it's leaving a lot of room for imagination.
Well, the reason why I ask about sets, because some people, I think that they have a tendency, they might write something very, very complex,
right? And
then it's just like, it's not. Do you write it with the intent of describing how everything is achieved, or are you just like, I'm not worried about this anymore. I'll wash my hands of it and let who's ever producing it figure it out on their own, rather than worrying about that because it's so complex or intricate, you may be preventing it from being produced?
Good question. Yeah, no, I definitely don't want it to prevent anything from being produced, and I definitely am leaving it up to them. Let's put it this way, I wouldn't ask for something that I don't think is attainable on any budget. Let's put it that, any budget, I think you could get away with a desert. Or, I mean, my current play Thistles calls for the ceiling falling in. Somebody falls through the ceiling, but you don't have to see it. I mean, you could stage it so that it's a sound effect. I mean, I'm not asking, I'm leaving it up to the producers and the director to figure out how to do it. I'm certainly not specifying that, but I'm also keeping in mind that it needs to be something that can be, doable.
Well, I mean, you just brought up a great point. Maybe look, it's a complex set if you've got the budget. If it's not, if you don't have the budget, then figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think a good play should be able to be done on any budget. You'll have to be creative and figure out how to do it, but it is possible to write a play that is not doable on any budget if you're asking for particular things that the play won't make sense without them. You know what I mean? The only thing that comes to mind right now is Inspector Calls, but now that I'm thinking about it, maybe the script doesn't call for it. But I know the Broadway production had like a house that folded up and it turned into like a suitcase. So I mean, maybe that was a directorial concept. I don't know, but from my point of view, I think a good play is one that can be done with very little, but nevertheless, it needs design of some kind. It can't just be a chair and a table. There always has to be some thought put into it.
Do you think that on that note that it's not your job as a playwright? It leave that to the job of the designer? Or
Absolutely, it's absolutely not our job. But I think it is our job as a playwright to evoke a setting. We have to evoke a setting. I mean, if we just say bare stage or a table and a chair, that's not evoking a mood or we have to inspire the designers. We have to inspire them so that we're giving them some sort of fuel to work with. We have to give them something to get excited about,
How do you achieve that?
Metaphor. Designers love that. So, using things like desert, I mean, that opens up all kinds of images in their minds. I mean, at least did for what I was working on. Abstracted skeletal. I mean, I think that implies like a skeleton or pieces. I don't know. Just giving them something I mean, Fool for Love, the desert plays such a big role in that play that when I directed it, I actually had walls that turned translucent and you could see the Mojave behind them and blood red, you know. So I think a good play excites people visually and you know, orally and just gives, you know, inspires ideas somehow.
You mentioned using slides.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so when you write your pieces, are the slides part of the play, or was that a directorial choice that you did because it's my play, I can make this decision? Or
good question. It actually was a directorial choice, but not mine. My original piece did not have any slides. We just had we had walls where we were projecting lighting and color. But the director who did the second production in Toronto, on a very small budget of like $500, got one of those old projectors that you used to use in classrooms, you know, where you put like microfiche. And it was a brilliant concept. Unfortunately, the budget was, I mean, that was an example of where it wasn't fully realized. So, but it excited me so much as a director that I directed the third production, the one we brought to LA, and then we did get like very high quality video, you know, film footage of the actual Spawn Ranch and everything, and it worked incredibly. But that was a director. But that's sort of what I'm getting at as a writer. It excited me that I inspired a director to come up with that. It wasn't on the page, but there was something in the play that brought that out, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving myself too much credit.
No, not at all. I think you should. So on that note, then, is that, do you recommend that? Should playwrights avoid inserting slide?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think they should ever give anything specific about the design. Never. But what I think they should try to do, and I don't, it's not easy, but, you know, is try to, in the way they describe the setting, think more like metaphorically, think more like abstractly, like, you know, the feeling of the place or the, you know, and keep it, you know, specific, but yet general to the extent that they're not, you know, cramping somebody's imagination, right? Because if you give too specific a picture, like, you know, it's a house with dandelion wallpaper and a staircase that's made of, I'm thinking, I don't know, Eugene O'Neill or something, or I don't know who else writes like that, you know, Ibsen, I don't know. But, you know, if it's too descriptive, then the mind goes to that, and it's very hard to wipe out that image. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like once you've seen a picture of something, it's hard to go back to what you would imagine before you saw the picture. So I think if you can avoid like really, really specific details, because that's only going to, I think, hamper the imagination of the designers.
Were there elements, or are there still elements of playwriting that you struggle with?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so much to learn. I think for me, the part that I struggled with the most in the first two plays was just letting the dialogue establish itself. As a director, I'm always afraid of people getting bored, right? You know, you want to have the next. Sure. So all my first two pieces they're very short scenes with you know, rhythmic transitions and changes and this, that, and the other. And I think with the third piece, I'm sort of experimenting on just letting them have longer dialogues. I mean, of course, with action or trying to, and that's the challenge, right? Is how do you let them have these longer dialogues, these longer conversations, and develop these relationships without it getting static? How do you work in some element of action? So that's a challenge, but I'm learning to sort of trust that a little bit more, and not rush it. You know?
When is it time for a monologue then? On that note, with longer dialogue, when is it? How do you know when it's time to put a monologue in?
For me, I tend to put the monologues in when I feel like a character is at an explosive emotional moment, when they have to sort of like really kind of like let something out. I feel like that's where my monologues come, when they need to have some sort of a dialogue, whether it's with themselves or with whoever else is there. The only other time I've used monologue is when I'm sort of like as a Glass Menagerie style in Broken Story, the journalist is a narrator. So she opens the play with a monologue, and she, ends the play with a monologue. So there's a bit of a, I guess you would say, narrational component to that, but there is also still an emotional component. But usually it comes from the character's need to really express something that's emotional.
Do you put structure? Do your monologues have structure behind them, or is it just like I don't want to say it's just a vomiting of words, but I mean,
it is kind of a vomiting of words, but it always has. For me, it comes from a rhythm. Like it has to. It's almost like writing a piece of music. It's like I'm writing a song, kind of. They're expressing something, but it has a beginning, middle, and end, and it ends with a button. That's just sort of. I view it from a musicality somehow.
Is that music there as you write it, or do you tweak it after you've gotten the first aspect of it?
It's usually there as I write it, but then if I go back and read it and it doesn't sound right, or it feels like there's a wrong note, then I'll tweak it so that it feels better.
How do you do that? How do you
usually by
get that musicality to it as you're writing it? If you're doing it as you write, what is it that you're doing? How are you manipulating that to achieve that as you write?
God, I wish I knew. It's
I recognize brilliance when I read it, but I don't know how to achieve it on page as I'm doing it. I'm fascinated by it.
One thing that helps is a few drinks. I'll tell you that much. I mean, I do my best emotional writing like in the evening when I'm less in my head, and more in here, and usually if I'll be honest, I mean a few beers will really kind of like open that up. But I won't sit down to write it unless I feel like I'm in that place. I have to wait to be in that place, It's different than when I'm writing like the plot stuff, when I'm plotting it out and making sure that it's a subconscious place. It's like, I don't know, how does somebody write a song, Doesn't it just come out one day when they feel something? I know.
Yeah, I suppose so, but I guess what my fear is, or like anything that, I guess my vocabulary becomes more limited when I'm in that realm. So I'm just fascinated by when a certain combination or formulation of words make it onto the page. It's like, where does that come from?
It comes from the character. I don't know where it comes from. It comes from the emotion. It comes from something. I mean, I certainly can't be in my what is it, left brain, right brain. I can't be in my analytical brain when I'm doing that. I mean, and that's part of the research, right? Like I do all the research and I'm thinking, how does this connect? But when I write those monologues, that has to be when I'm like, I have to disconnect from all of that. It's kind of like studying for a test and then throwing the books away and just whatever comes out. I don't know. It just mixes all in with something.
Do you write on a schedule?
No, I can't. Impossible.
How do you finish a piece? How do you start a piece?
I don't rush it. I mean, I start a piece after I've done enough research that I feel like I have an entryway in. I don't always know where I'm going when I start a piece, but I can't get too far. I mean, I'll start it just to get going because I feel like I have to get going, and then at a certain point I'll have to figure out what the ending is, and I always try to have an aha moment. I always try to have an element of surprise in my plays, something unexpected that people don't see coming. So I have to have that hook. I have to figure out what that is at some point, within the first, I'd say, 45 pages. But I don't have a schedule. I'm not on any kind of time pressure. I wait for those moments when I feel like I'm connected to it to write that, that first sort of subtextual stuff. I have to have that framework, though. The framework has to, after I start writing, then I have to have that framework of where I'm going. And when I stop writing, I have to stop with a sentence that I know that it's going to lead me into the next time I sit down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
It's opening like a question to the next, so that when I come back, I'm like, this is where I'm taking off from. But I won't come back until I feel ready. Could be months.
Do you know what those surprises are when you? Not
always when I start, no. But I have to. In order to get there, I have to. I have to eventually, before like I said, I might write 1 or 2 or 3 scenes, but then I have to make sure I know where I'm going, and then I do sort of chart out how I'm going to get there. I mean, not on an outline or anything like that, but like as I write each scene to the next, I'm leaving an opener for where I'm going next, and I don't stop writing until I know where I'm going to go the next time I sit down.
Oh, all right, fascinating. Yeah. So if you insert that surprise, do you go back later and drop some kind of hint? Because I find it with amateur or beginning playwrights, it's like there's just something that comes out, and I'm like, where did that come from? And then there's some kind of justification for it, but it's like, no, you can't just,
Yeah, I don't know if I consciously dropped any hints, but I will say, with both of these pieces, there have been people who, particularly with You Are Perfect, that got the twist before it happened. Others didn't. I mean, ideally, it's better if they don't. Sure. I think I did probably drop a few very subtle things. I don't know if I did it consciously, but it was already so part of what I was doing that it just sort of did, With Broken Story, there's definitely elements. I don't want to give it away, but it's when I wrote the first scene, I didn't know where I was going with it, but yet somehow it does tie in, because I think I created that surprise sort of based on what I started with. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of hooks together. I don't know. So
do you write linearly, or as far as okay?
Yes, I do. I mean, even though I know where I'm going, I don't jump and write the end and then come back. I write from beginning to end. But I kind of have like a map in my mind of where I'm going.
Do you edit as you go?
No.
Do you wait until that initial reading with another actor before you?
I usually write the whole thing, come back, read it myself, make some of my own changes. Then I give it to my wife, who's my first dramaturg. She'll give me some changes. I'll make those. Then when we both feel like we've done everything we can, then we do. And then I'll also, during the process of writing it, I'll be reading it with an actor. But that doesn't usually make any changes. That's more just so I can hear it, so I can keep writing. And then, once my wife and I feel like we've made enough of those changes that we don't have that we need more outside eyes, then we do a reading for an audience, and we get the feedback of the actors and the audience, and then I go back and make more rewrites.
Is she there for that reading with that one actor as well, to where she's listening?
No, she's not there for that. No, she's not there for that. That's more me in the process of writing. I have to, yeah. And you know what? Every play is a little different too, I have to say. I need more readings with the one I'm currently working on. I did a reading with a director, and then another, somebody else directed the reading, and then I needed a reading just to hear some other actors do it, and I'm going to need another one. So maybe it's my process is changing, or maybe the play is, the style of the play calls for a different thing. I don't know. Each of them have their own needs.
Sure. What do you lend your success as a playwright to?
Well, I hope I don't even know if I've had success. I mean, I guess it's success is relative, the success that I've had, I guess I would lend it to the great people I work with, number one. My experience as a director, I really don't think I ever could have. I mean, if I had done that playwriting, workshop or whatever independent study back in 1994 when I had been asked to, I don't think the plays would have been nearly as successful as they are now. I think life experience, just letting the process dictate itself and being patient. Yeah.
You did eventually do a workshop, or was it just a class or a workshop?
But then I was asked if I could, from out of that class, I was asked to do an independent study in playwriting, and I didn't do it. I just didn't. I didn't feel like I had the material.
Did you walk away with anything beneficial from that class, or?
I mean, I definitely knew that I had some instincts as a writer, and I felt like somewhere deep down I would probably come back to it at some point. But I really think it was the directing that made my particular style of writing what it is, because I just feel like I had an insight into how a story moves, and I think a lot of writers don't pay attention to that, and you have to think about that. I mean, a piece of theater, you can't have people, in a castle in 1 minute and the next minute they're flying in an elevator. I mean, you have to think about how does one scene move into the next, and how does the world evolve, and having that knowledge, I think, and just the experience of working with a lot of text has really helped me, develop my writing style. So it was a really great education.
What's the best piece of advice you were ever given? And if that's different, what's the best piece of advice you could ever give another playwright? Whether that's, well, even if it's still, it's if they're just starting out, whether they're established or...
Advice. I'm trying to think if I ever was given any advice. I don't really have the playwriting mentors or mentorship, but the one piece of advice that I was given, I don't even remember who gave it to me, but it was a really long time ago, and that is just make the work. Make the work. And when I say make the work, I don't mean just write the work. I mean get it on stage. So in that sense, as a playwright, even if you don't have a ton of producing experience or whatever, and you don't think you can actually produce a full-fledged show, well, at least produce like a workshop or something, and get it on its feet with actors and see how it plays in real time, standing up with movement and everything, because you can workshop a play to death just on paper, and you're not going to get the benefit of that, that experience and you learn from that. You learn more about how to make your writing better, how to make the plays move better, how to work with it, how to make the characters more developed for actors and everything. So I would say just don't wait, do it. Even if you have to direct it yourself, do it.
Did you submit to anybody first, or did you just say, all right, I like it, I like where it's at, I think it's done, and away we go?
Yeah, I didn't submit to anybody for You Are Perfect or Broken Story, because I wanted to direct them first myself. Again, I'm a director and I have a theater company, so that's not, always easy for everybody to do. But for me, that was like a really important part of the process. And I don't think I've submitted my plays nearly as much as I should. You Are Perfect, I do have on the new Play Exchange, and I did get a production out of that in Illinois, a great production out during the middle of the pandemic, so that was great. So I recommend that, And with Broken Story, I'm going to, as soon as we're done with LA, then I'll feel like it's ready to be put out in the world for other companies to, hopefully produce, and new Play Exchange or whatever, so...
You said during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Was that a Zoom production?
No, it was actually live. They did it in March of 2021, which is unheard of. I mean, and actually the pandemic is part of the reason why they did it, because they were a theater. This is actually the theater where Dick Van Dyke got his start in Danville, Illinois, called Red Mask Players. And they usually do very big productions because it's like a community theater, and they usually do like musicals. But their budget, because of COVID, was so small, they wanted a very small play, and You Are Perfect is 3 characters, and the director was a huge Manson fan, so he went on the New Play Network looking for a intimate play about Charles Manson, and there you go.
What was that process like? Did you rep yourself, or did you?
I rep myself, but I'm a member of the Dramatists Guild, so they have a wonderful boilerplate of templates. So I just basically went into as a member, you can go into their their database of contracts, and I got a simple contract, on how to create a licensing agreement, and I tweaked it a little bit here and there, and just sent it out. So that was great to have that, because I don't think I would have known. I've never written a contract. It was my first produced play, so that I hadn't produced, so I wouldn't have known what to do.
Have you submitted it for publication or anything like that?
I have submitted it, and I have not, so far, I have not been successful with that, but I'll keep trying.
What was that process like, and have you just not heard back, or is it like, have you heard back and it's like... I
did hear back. I mean, nobody, I think it was Dramatists Play Service that... through the Players Club in New York, where I'm a member, and actually I'm an ex-board member now. I was on the board, served 3 years. The president of Dramatists Play Service is a member, so somehow I got connected with him, and he offered to read it, but I didn't get any feedback. Just it's not what we're looking for or whatever. And then I think I can't remember. I've submitted it to a few other places. I don't remember what they were, but no, I don't even know if I got a response or not. Yeah. Nice. It'd be nice to get a little feedback, because that would be. Actually, I'm sorry. There was one person who read it. This is one of those people who got taken down by the Me Too movement. I'm trying to remember his name. He was heading a big theater in Massachusetts. Can't think of the name, but maybe it was Long Wharf Theater. But in any event, Gordon somebody or other. But anyway, he did read it and did give some feedback, and he basically totally didn't get my intention with the play. He wanted it more realistic. Didn't want any of the imaginations, and that would have been rewriting the play, and I didn't want to do that. But at least he gave me some specifics, which I appreciated.
Sure. I'm totally going to go off because is it the Players Club? Because when I was reading your bio, I said the board member of the Players. So
it is the Players. It is a private club, but it's called the Players. But it's a private social club in Manhattan. Yeah, Gramercy Park.
And do they still exist?
They do. They're great. They're a wonderful club.
And what exactly do they do? Because now we're going to have to add a link so people can take advantage of it.
The Players Club on Gramercy Park was created and founded by Edmund Booth way back in the 1800s, and it's an old brownstone, still very well kept. And his bedroom is upstairs. You can tour it. It's like a museum. You can see the slippers he wore. But he founded it as
no relation to John Wilkes.
Yes, his brother.
Oops,
yeah,
sorry,
his brother. And he founded the club back then because artists, actors in particular, didn't really have a lot of opportunities to mingle with business people. They were sort of considered lower class citizens. So he wanted to create an opportunity for actors to mingle with lawyers and doctors and business people and patrons of the arts. And to this day, that's still sort of what the club is. It's a home for artists, but also a place where patrons of the arts can mingle with artists and anybody who has a love of the arts, whether it's visual arts or theater. And we have a lot of members from the performing arts, but also a lot of members who are in business. And it's a great way for the patrons of the arts and people who appreciate the arts to develop relationships with the people who are making the arts. So, and
is this more of an in-person, like you really need to be in New York to really take advantage of it, or can you kind of be a virtual member?
You can be what they call an out-of-town member. We actually do have a lot of members from Los Angeles. We actually have a reciprocal with the Magic Castle. So last time I was out here, through my Players membership, I went to the Magic Castle. Oh. And members of the Magic Castle, when they come to New York, can take advantage of the Players Club. And as an out-of-town member, you get reduced dues and whatever. And when you're in New York, if a lot of people are bi-coastal, if you're spending time in the city, it's a great place where you can hang out during the day, sit in the library, have a drink, go have dinner, catch a show, whatever, have a business meeting, host a reception, whatever. It's like a home away from home kind of place.
Kind of reminds me of the old Friars Club.
Yeah, very much, very similar.
Do you know what the dues are for
I should know. As a former board member, I should know. I believe their dues are about like $275 a month. That's
oh my God, that's a lot of money.
I think that's actually, if you compare it with something like Soho House or whatever, it's actually very, very reasonable.
Do you get like a free drink a month for that whole thing?
No, you don't get it. There's actually there's a minimum. You have to spend at least $50 a month. But
so now it's $325.
But there's a lot of benefits that come with it. You get free space. Like you can have meetings for free. Rehearsal space, and maybe not in LA, but in New York City, space is the killer for the wallet. Yeah. I was telling people on another podcast that, to rent a theater in Manhattan now, equivalent to like the Sherry.
Sure, yeah.
It could be is $5,000 a week. I mean, that's putting small theater companies out of business. Right, we can't afford $20,000 just for the theater. So no. We're all going to be coming out here to do our shows.
LA still needs good theater.
Well, at least LA makes theater possible for indie artists on a budget and small theater companies. So
I think LA is getting better in their theater. I think people have finally stepped up. About 20 years ago, it wasn't the best. So
yeah, well, it seems very welcoming now, and it seems like there's definitely a theater community. And so far, I've been really, really, happy with the warm welcome from everybody here. So
when will Broken Story be available for royalties to produce to the rest of the world?
I would say as soon as we close on the 27th of November, as soon as I can get my act together and put the script up on the new Play Exchange, it'll be accessible to anybody who goes on there looking for it, and it'll be open for. At this time there's not that I know of any upcoming productions, so it's going to be available to anybody who wants to take a stab.
You kind of hinted at what you're currently working on after this. Is there a title yet, or
the title is Thistles, kind of like the plant that's sort of. It's funny because my wife and I were just out in Desert Hot Springs yesterday and eating lunch on the table. The bouquet of flowers was a bouquet of thistles, and I said, "Wow, how apropos!"
Exactly, exactly. Are you on the socials? Can people find you on the socials?
Facebook, Insta, Twitter. Yep, I'm there.
And what are those handles? So I'll put them in the show notes as well.
Sure. I believe it's CY Marion for Facebook and
that's
Twitter,
Marion.
And then on Insta, I think it's Cyndy.Marion. Yeah.
Wonderful. Cyndy Marion, thanks for coming on to the Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. Tell us what your favorite part of this episode was, and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, until we see each other again, keep writing.